911, what's your emergency?
She's not coming up! He's got her! Kairo has her!
Who is Kairo? Is this a person?
No, it's the whale! He pulled her under and she's not coming back up!
Melissa Vance, a veteran Orca trainer with over a decade of experience, was killed during a routine interaction by the very whale she once called her soul companion. If stories like this make you question how far trust can stretch in the face of raw instinct, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let us know where you're watching from. It was the kind of morning no one thought twice about. A quiet Wednesday at OceanWorld Pacific, the kind of day where trainers slipped into familiar routines and the air carried the low hum of filtration systems instead of cheering crowds. The park wasn't open to the public yet, and only a skeleton crew was on duty, performing early maintenance, feeding routines, and prepping the animals for the afternoon sessions. Melissa Vance arrived early, as she always did, her hair tucked under a baseball cap, her uniform damp from the misty air near the tanks. She liked these quiet hours. No screaming children, no clapping, no staged performances, just her and Kairo, the orca she had trained and bonded with for nearly a decade. They had a routine, one she believed kept him mentally stimulated. So when she stepped into the enclosure that morning for a free contact session, meaning no protective barrier, no holding tools, just skin-to-skin proximity, it didn't feel like a risk to her. But others had raised concerns. Just weeks earlier, a junior trainer had reported a near lunge during a routine feed. Kairo had always been large, over 9.0 pounds, but he was getting unpredictable. Melissa, however, had waved off the concern. "He's just moody. I can read him," she reportedly said in the break room. And for a few minutes that morning, she was right. Security camera footage, which would later be reviewed in a dimly lit office filled with silence and horror, showed Melissa laughing as she offered Kairo a fish from a silver bucket. The whale floated in the water, still, almost reverent, as she leaned over and stroked the side of his head. She smiled, tapping her hand gently on the water's surface, the cue for a spin or a breach. But Kairo didn't spin. Instead, without warning, his body rolled and lunged upward. The movement was so fast, the camera barely caught the blur of his mouth locking onto her arm. She screamed, the sound carrying faintly across the empty arena, and then vanished beneath the churning water. One maintenance worker nearby heard it and thought it was part of a vocalization exercise, nothing unusual. By the time someone realized she hadn't resurfaced, over 2 minutes had passed. The pool was still, save for a ripple near the far side where Kairo circled, his dorsal fin slicing the water. Melissa was gone. What had started as a quiet, routine morning had turned into a silent emergency. Staff scrambled to radio each other, unsure whether to initiate a full emergency protocol or attempt to lure Kairo away. There was no formal process for this, not anymore. The footage would later reveal just how quickly trust can dissolve into terror, and how even a bond built over years can break in seconds. Eyewitnesses would later describe it as both surreal and savage, the moment a gentle interaction between woman and whale turned into something no one could stop. Kairo, the orca Melissa, had trusted more than some people, suddenly latched onto her arm with a force that defied belief. According to one staffer who witnessed the initial moment from a side hallway, he just grabbed her and didn't let go. It wasn't like play, it was something else. Her scream-a-high, sharp sound that pierced the cavernous stillness of the training pullisted only seconds before she was pulled underwater in a violent, sweeping motion. A flurry of bubbles followed, then silence. No one on site had immediate access to the emergency control kit's devices, specifically designed to distract orca behavior with sound, food, or aversive techniques, because they had been locked away in a separate building for risk mitigation after a controversial policy change. As the realization of the situation set in, staff began frantically calling supervisors, but those crucial first moments when Melissa could have still been conscious were lost to confusion and disorganization. One junior trainer, visibly shaken in a later interview, admitted that none of them were trained for a solo incident during a non-show session. Meanwhile, Kairo remained underwater with Melissa for nearly 2 minutes before surfacing alone. The water was disturbed, red tinges beginning to fan out across the blue, a horrifying signal of what was unfolding beneath. When he did emerge, it wasn't with calm or clarity, but erratic behavior, tail slapping, rapid circling, deep vocalizations. It became clear to at least one veteran handler that Kairo wasn't simply being aggressive, he was confused, possibly panicked. Staff had noticed changes in his demeanor over the past week. Refusal to eat on schedule, low-level agitation, and periods of total unresponsiveness during rehearsals. Melissa herself had written notes in the logbook suggesting Kairo might be moody or disconnected, but her observations were brushed aside. Management had been under pressure to maintain show schedules due to a recent ticket slump, and any recommendation to pull Kairo from public interaction was considered a financial liability. Now, that decision loomed over them like a curse. Inside the control room, someone finally hit the emergency alert, but the response was chaotic and slow. Divers were not on standby. No vet team was present. The few handlers who attempted to intervene were left shouting into the void, watching helplessly as a 1,000-pound predator and a beloved human vanished into a dark ballet of blood and thrashing water. What they didn't know then, but would soon foresee, that Melissa was likely alive during those first moments, struggling in the disorienting abyss, her body pummeled by instinct, not hatred. Kairo wasn't acting out of malice. Many would later argue is unraveling in a world that never belonged to him in the first place. The next few minutes were a nightmare unfolding in slow motion. Melissa resurfaced once gasping, blood trailing from her arm where Kairo had clamped down. Her face, barely above the waterline, was contorted in pain and desperation. A trainer on the upper deck caught a glimpse of her, eyes wide, pledingas. She flailed, trying to stay afloat with one functioning arm. But before anyone could throw a rope or make it to the edge, Kairo surged beneath her and dragged her down again in a powerful dive. It was what marine trainers refer to as a deep dive, a maneuver often used during play or display rituals, but one that can be disorienting and deadly to a human. These dives can reach depths where light vanishes and breath control becomes impossible. In those terrifying seconds below, Melissa likely lost all sense of direction, her lungs burning, her body battered by the force of the orca's movements. Witnesses reported that the water remained eerily calm on the surface, with only the occasional swirl or ripple betraying the life and death struggle happening below. Some staff tried banging on the metal side rails, hoping the sound would distract or agitate Kairo into releasing her. Others yelled into radios that weren't answered fast enough. The rescue gear-weighted nets, decoy lures, sonic Q-SWAS still locked in a cabinet down the hall. And the emergency dive team, once mandatory during free contact sessions, had been phased out months earlier to cut costs. As minutes stretched, panic turned to paralysis. Kairo finally surfaced again, but Melissa did not. Trainers shouted his name, slapped the water, anything to coax him toward the side platform. He hovered in place, massive and still, blood spreading around his body like ink from a broken pen. When Melissa surfaced again more than 4 minutes after the initial submersion, it was only for a brief moment. Her body was limp, mouth open, eyes unfocused. Her injuries were visible, now deep contusions, an arm twisted unnaturally, her wetsuit torn across the torso, one arm flailed weakly. And then, with terrifying calm, Kairo nudged her with his rostrum, rolled, and pulled her under once more. Experts reviewing the footage later pointed out that Kairo's actions were not consistent with predatory behavior. In the wild, dominant orcas use similar motions to assert control within pods or during mating rituals. This wasn't aggression. They claimed it was confusion, a breakdown in the fragile framework captivity imposes on wild instincts. But to those watching it happen in real time, it didn't matter. A human being was drowning. By the time the official emergency response team arrived at 11 full minutes after the first scream, Melissa had vanished beneath the water for good. What they would retrieve later was not just her broken body, but the bitter truth of a system that failed her, the lack of preparation, the ignored warnings, and the illusion that love alone could protect her from the wild. By the time Melissa's body was pulled from the tank, there was no heartbeat, No breathenly silence, broken by the muffled sobs of her coworkers and the low, echoing hum of filtration pumps that never stopped running. Paramedics arrived within minutes of the recovery but quickly confirmed what many already feared. Melissa Vance was gone. The official cause of death was ruled as drowning, but the autopsy revealed much more severe internal trauma, fractured ribs, ruptured organs, and deep bite marks consistent with orca jaw pressure. She had not simply drowned, she had been overwhelmed by force. Her body was never meant to endure. Kairo, the orca she had spent over a decade nurturing and defending, was sedated within hours of the incident and moved into a medical holding pool where he would remain in isolation pending investigation. His usual trainers no longer approached him. The pool lights stayed dim, and the ambient music once played to soothe the animals was turned off. A heavy quiet settled over OceanWorld Pacific, one that even the dolphins seemed to feel. The staff, some numb, others angry, gathered days later for a private memorial inside the facility. They placed white roses on the edge of the tank where she had last been seen, and a few of her colleagues painted a mural of her favorite Orca Kairo himself on a wall overlooking the enclosure. The tribute, while heartfelt, was tinged with heartbreak and confusion. Could they still honor the animal that had taken her life? Could they even look at him the same way again? Outside the gates, the media storm had already begun. Helicopters buzzed overhead, reporters camped outside the employee entrance, and headlines blared across screens nationwide. The most repeated line plastered across tabloids and news tickers alike read, "Trainer loved her whale, but it didn't love back." The phrasing cut deep, especially for those who had known Melissa's convictions. She had always maintained that orcas didn't belong in tanks, even as she tried to make their lives bearable. But now, to the public, it appeared as though her love had betrayed her. Animal rights groups seized the moment, calling for the immediate end of orca captivity. Hashtags trended for days. Protesters appeared at the front gate holding signs that read, "Free Kairo" and "Melissa died for this." OceanWorld executives scrambled to contain the damage, issuing carefully worded statements about unforeseen tragedy and ongoing internal review. Internally, however, morale collapsed. Staff members quit. Parents canceled field trips. Sponsors pulled funding. And Kairo, the star of the show, remained out of sight, alone in the water. In the weeks that followed, Melissa's death would not only become a symbol of personal tragedy, but a spark for public reckoning. The walls of the marine park still stood, but the illusion of control, that comforting lie, told through years of choreography and smile had been shattered beyond repair. In the weeks following Melissa's death, a different kind of story began to surface, one not told in headlines, but in testimonies, documents, and suppressed warnings. Marine behaviorists brought in to analyze the incident quickly uncovered troubling patterns in Kairo's history. He had, on multiple occasions, displayed signs of escalating agitation, unprovoked lunges during training sessions, periods of food aggression, and complete refusal to perform certain behaviors. These incidents, scattered across logs and whispered among junior trainers, painted a picture not of a rogue orca, but a deeply distressed one. Melissa herself had noticed the changes. In the months leading up to the attack, she filed 2 separate internal reports documenting what she called sudden, unpredictable lunges and increased resistance to tactile commands. She wasn't panicking, she was asking for help. But supervisors brushed her concerns aside with a familiar refrain. Trust the process. It was the facility's mantra, a reminder to stay within the boundaries of standardized protocols, even when those boundaries were clearly failing. What Melissa didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that the process itself had already been compromised. Due to recent budget cuts, enrichment sessions for the orcas had been quietly reduced. What once were daily interactive routines designed to keep the animals mentally stimulated had become a bare minimum program. Toys were rotated less frequently, exercises grew repetitive, and one-on-one time with trainers became a luxury. The result? Boredom, sensory deprivation, and psychological stress conditions known to spark dangerous behaviors in captive marine mammals. Orcas are highly intelligent, social creatures, evolved to travel up to 100 miles a day in the wild. Trapped in tanks, a fraction of that range, they suffer from what researchers now recognize as zoochosis, a mental decline caused by confinement. Stereotypic behaviors, such as head bobbing, teeth gnashing, or floating listlessly near the surface, are all warning signs of a mind unraveling. Kairo exhibited every one of them in the final months before the tragedy, and yet no action was taken. One former employee came forward anonymously, revealing that complaints about Kairo's declining mental state were routinely dismissed in staff meetings. They didn't want to lose their showpiece, he said. Kairo was the main draw. If he didn't perform, they lost ticket sales. The system had become a trap not just for the animals, but for the humans who loved them. Melissa, caught between her compassion and the corporate machine, tried to bridge that gap, but her voice was drowned out by bureaucracy, her warnings filed away as noise. After her death, the facility attempted to downplay the history of behavioral red flags, citing Kairo's overall consistency and performance. But leaked documents told another story. Incident logs marked with red tape, notes scribbled in margins, emails marked urgent, and left unanswered all pointed to a single, devastating truth. Melissa's death wasn't just an accident. It was the consequence of a system that chose profit over precaution, illusion over honesty, and silence over safety. The legal reckoning came swiftly, and it hit OceanWorld Pacific like a tidal wave. Just 3 weeks after Melissa Vance's death, her family filed a wrongful death lawsuit that sent shockwaves through the marine park industry. The suit alleged gross negligence, citing unsafe working conditions, a blatant disregard for behavioral warnings, and the park's failure to provide emergency procedures for free contact training sessions. The most damning evidence came from inside. A former employee who had grown disillusioned with the park's leadership released undercover footage that revealed the chilling truth. There was no functional emergency retrieval plan in place for scenarios like Melissa's. Staff could be seen in the videos fumbling with locked doors, miscommunicating over radios, and asking one another where the rescue nets were stored. One clip showed a whiteboard in the trainer's lounge with the phrase, "Emergency Dive Response TBD," still scrawled in dry erase marker. The footage aired on national news within days, prompting widespread outrage. Animal rights organizations, many of which had been battling marine parks for years, seized the moment. For them, Melissa's death was the final proof they needed to dismantle the illusion of safety behind glass tanks and choreographed smiles. PETA, the Whale Sanctuary Project, and other advocacy groups held vigils outside OceanWorld's gates, using Melissa's image alongside Kairo's as a symbol of broken trust on both sides of the glass. "She was the best of them," one activist said, "and if she wasn't safe, no one is." Online petitions to ban orca captivity surged past 1 million signatures in days. Legislators, once hesitant to wade into the murky waters of marine entertainment, began to draft bills that would prohibit future breeding and limit performance-based training. Meanwhile, OceanWorld Pacific's corporate response was tone-deaf at best. Press releases spoke of a rare and tragic accident, emphasizing the park's decades of excellence in animal stewardship. But the public wasn't buying it. Sponsors pulled out one after anothereko-friendly brands, hotel chains, even a children's toy company that had once featured OceanWorld mascots in its packaging. Schools canceled field trips. Former celebrity spokespeople issued public statements distancing themselves from the park. Ticket sales dropped by nearly 40% in just 6 weeks. A multi-million-dollar expansion project was shelved indefinitely. Behind closed doors, executives scrambled to salvage their brand, holding emergency meetings to discuss rebranding, even considering the eventual phasing out of live orca shows. But the damage was done. Melissa's story had become a national conversation, not just about one woman and one whale, but about the ethical foundation of an entire industry. The image of her smiling beside Kairo, once used in promotional brochures, now appeared on protest banners and investigative documentaries. Her death didn't just expose the cracks in OceanWorld Pacific's safety protocols, it shattered the illusion that marine parks could safely house creatures of such immense intelligence and power. What began as a tragedy was quickly evolving into a movement, and there would be no turning back. Melissa Vance's death did not vanish into the cycle of headlines and fading hashtags. It echoed, deep and persistent, across the entire marine park industry. In the aftermath, as the initial wave of grief gave way to soul-searching and reform, her story began to take on new weight, not just as a tragedy, but as a final warning. Her name became a rallying cry at industry conferences and activist rallies alike. Marine parks across the globe quietly reassessed their practices. Some accelerated the shift away from free contact training, others began investing in virtual reality experiences to replace live animal shows. But perhaps the most powerful tribute to her life came in the form of the Melissa Vance Foundation, launched by her family and former colleagues. Its mission was simple yet radical: advocate for ethical marine mammal care, support sanctuaries for retired performing animals, and phase out the use of wild creatures for entertainment. The foundation partnered with coastal sanctuaries, funded research into cetacean mental health, and provided legal support to whistleblowers within the industry. Their message was not anti-animal, it was anti-illusion. They believed, as Melissa had begun to believe in her final months, that no amount of training, affection, or routine could ever erase the wild from a wild animal. That belief was heartbreakingly confirmed when Melissa's personal journal was found weeks after her death, tucked in her locker behind her wetsuit. Among her final entries was a line that stopped everyone who read it cold: "He's wild at heart. I only hope I'm wise enough to listen when he tells me something's wrong." It was a quiet sentence, written without drama or bitterness, but it held within it the very truth that the industry had ignored. Melissa hadn't been naive. She had known, perhaps not consciously, perhaps not fully, that something in Kairo had begun to shift. And yet, she had walked into that tank, trusting love to hold the line against instinct. Experts now cite her death in academic papers, safety protocols, and documentaries. Not as a fluke, but as proof that even the most experienced trainers, even the deepest bonds, cannot tame evolution. Orcas are not villains, neither was Kairo, but they are not pets, not performers, not props. Melissa's legacy is one of passion, of compassion, and of painful wisdom earned too late. Today, the mural bearing her image still watches over the now empty tank at OceanWorld Pacific. Visitors stop and read the plaque beneath it. Children ask who she was. Parents answer carefully. And somewhere beyond the gates, the debate she died for continues. Melissa Vance's story endures not because of how it ended, but because of what it revealed. That loving the wild does not entitle us to control it, and when we pretend otherwise, it's always the innocent who pay the price.